topic today is your unfair advantage, and I've developed this little worksheet from things I've heard and things I've thought and things I've created and put it together for this Master Laughter class I'm doing in January. But when I looked at it, I thought this would not only did it help me when I put it together to reframe some things, but I'm like, this is perfect for Club 52 folks because you guys are invested and you're focused on what you're doing. So I wanted to share it with you all and walk you through the steps of it. And hopefully you'll be able to implement some of this stuff as early as next week as far as getting some things dialed in. So if you're listening on a recording of this and you would like the Unfair Advantage worksheet, just shoot an email to schooloflaughs@gmail.com and put that in the subject, and I'll get you the worksheet that we're getting ready to walk through here on the episode. So let me pull that up and we'll get rolling. So the Unfair Advantage worksheet, what made me think about this is a lot of us do comedy, and when people say, what do you do for fun? We say, do comedy, and that just doesn't give it justice. We do a lot more than that. And a lot of times it's just sitting down like we're doing right now and focusing on exactly what it is that we're accomplishing and doing so that we can explain it better to others. Just like John said a second ago, those monks that practice these things, they do it so much they know exactly what they're doing when time comes. And if we bump into somebody that could potentially hire us or tell somebody about us and we stumble through what we do, it's going to make them, not very, they're not going to believe that you do what you do because you can barely articulate it. And on top of that, they're probably not going to remember it clearly because you didn't articulate it clearly to talk to their potential buyer. So if you're looking at the worksheet, top left, the first three blanks there is, what is my unfair advantage? And unfair advantage is just a fun way of saying, what can I do that most of the other people that are trying to do what I'm doing in my niche can't do? Or what creates a niche for me that others don't have? So it can be a variety of things. Three easy ways to think of it. One would be, what have you done before comedy? What is your skill set and work history? What did you do for 5 years, 10 years? Maybe there's something that you've learned at all the things you did before comedy, but there was one consistent thing that you crushed everywhere you went. That's going to be part of your unfair advantage. It doesn't have to do anything with being funny. I want to make that clear. This is a skill you have outside of funny. So it could be that you worked as a social worker for 25, 30 years before you did comedy. So you know how to work with people that have different issues and different things they're trying to overcome. So you're more compassionate. You have more empathy than a typical comedian would have. It could be that you used to work at an IT company and you solve technical issues with how to get people on the same platform and share information together. That could be useful as well in comedy. It could be that you're great at search engine optimization. You're like a computer geek in that way, that you know how to maximize things on the internet. That's a huge unfair advantage that most comedians don't have. But it could be as simple as, excuse me, I'm a great listener. I'm able to shut up until the other person is done talking so that I can listen to what they're saying and then prepare my answer instead of listening to interrupt and tell them what I know about their situation. I can listen to their entire situation and then comprise the right answer with the information I have. And when I speak to corporate groups about listening, that's the thing that kind of they forget about, is that just because you have knowledge doesn't mean you have to insert it as soon as you see there's an opportunity. You have to listen to see what part of that knowledge is the right answer. So being a good listener would be a huge unfair advantage. If you're able to listen long enough to somebody explain a problem, not 9 times out of 10, but probably pretty close, they solve their problem because it's the first time they've ever got to say it all the way through out loud without somebody interrupting it. And they almost finish the whole statement with, oh, and I see what I need to do. Thanks for listening. And you had to say 0. So that to me is one of the biggest unfair advantages you could have as far as a communicator, is not communicating right off the bat. Your unfair advantage could also be a network of people. Maybe, if you are or were a pastor and you have a network of Southern Baptist preachers that you go meet up with every year, or you might be a missionary and you meet up occasionally with the group to share best practices and how you were able to accomplish fundraising. That could be an unfair advantage. Being a fundraiser could be an unfair advantage. Just having the knowledge on how to get people to part with their money. That's handy in comedy too. Not only at the ticket price point of sale, but the back of the room sales, and also selling yourself for the next gig. So all those things. If you're a salesman at any point in your career and a successful one at that, that's a huge, because you've got a whole built-in vernacular and framework of, stuff like ABC, always be closing, and those things that you articulate a point. So all those things could be an unfair advantage. And in that list, I have 3 or 4 spots there, but you could list 20 and come back later and zero it in on different things and do this worksheet over and over again with each specific unfair advantage. So list as many as you can initially, and then make copies of this and go back in and single in on one unfair advantage and do this whole worksheet through it. For John, one could be the drawing, and you go through this whole worksheet and prepare a pitch with that as an unfair advantage. Another could be, being a pastor and preaching. So this worksheet could be 20 worksheets, could be just one, whatever it is. And if you don't know what your unfair advantage is, it's pretty simple. Ask your friends and your family, just say, be honest with me. I'm not looking for compliments or praise, but what is it that I do that you think is a skill set that kind of gives me an advantage over people or sticks out to you? All right. And then again, for each time you do this, look at the next section down, my competition. What and who do you see in your specific niche, whether it's women's ministry or whether it's men's groups, or whether it's prison ministry or comedy clubs or whatever it might be? Who do you think is on the level, or maybe even a little bit further down the road than you are, that you see as your competition that you want to be able to achieve as much as and perhaps surpass down the road? And again, there's 3 spots there, but if you know of 10 people that are your competition, that just gives you more research to do. And then with those, I would search them out on the internet. First, I would start with your first one. Is go see who, John Doe or Jane Doe's website, what that looks like, and how are they communicating to other people that they are the person to hire. What terms are they using? They might know the niche so well, they're using very specific inside terms that only people in that industry would understand. And if they have that and you don't, then that's one little advantage they have over you in their copywriting. But also look at their, how are they showing visually that they're better than you? Are they showing great pictures of great events, or are they showing kind of average pictures of not so great events? What's the visual if somebody's not even reading the copy on their website? Do they look like they're professional? Do they look like they deserve to be paid what they're asking for and what the ballpark they're in? And I would do that with each of your competitors. You might even stumble onto other people through that process that you haven't thought of before, but by looking at one website, it leads to another. I would go down all those rabbit holes and make sure you backtrack and make sure you accomplish the task of looking at them and seeing how they communicate their unfair advantage. If they don't at all, then that's going to be a good thing for you, because you'll have one and they won't. That makes sense so far? So that to me is a great exercise. And I do that with speakers, and then I do it with speakers on each of the 3 topics that I talk about. I do that with comedians in the corporate world, and I also do that with comedians that are in the church world. So when I do this, that's 5 different groups of competitors that I have. So I go through all those. And you could even get it as far down as people only in my area, within 500 miles of me. That's kind of a goal for me for next year, I love traveling. I'll take all the gigs when they come in, but if I can stay within a smaller region, that's going to benefit my family and I'll be home more. So if I wanted to, I could scale it down to just that and try to dominate my area, which is always a good idea anyway. Because when you get referrals in that area, you'll be back in that same area you want to be in. I love going to California, probably do 4 or 5 times a year. If I get a referral, that means I got to go all the way back to California to do that gig. And it's a day of travel there, day of travel back, day of performing. So it can be a 2 or 3 day thing. And if I'm charging my normal fee, then I've just given away 2 free days of my life traveling. So again, I'll take the work. I'm blessed to have any work at all. But if I can work in my area, even better. So one way to look at your competition. All right, so we've got our unfair advantage. We've got our competition and what they're doing. But how do you have proof? We could tell somebody that I'm the best at this or that I outrank others in this area, but what is the actual, what they call social proof that you can do that? So a few things, if you were going to look at hiring somebody, just think about that. What would they do? They might check out your LinkedIn profile if you have one and see how many connections you have and how many people have given you a positive recommendation on LinkedIn. That might just be one little thing they do. They're probably going to look at your Twitter if you have that. And you might be an expert on one specific thing, but if you never tweet about it, if you're just tweeting pictures of your cat or your last meal, you're not positioning yourself as an expert. And I know people have different reasons they get on social media. Some people just like to have fun with it, but in this business, to have some tweets relative to what you do or a specific tweet, a Twitter handle just for that, that's a big plus. Could be your YouTube page. When's the last time you put a fresh video on there? Is it 3 years old? They go to your competitors and they put up 2 this month. They're probably going to go with the competitor, all things being equal. I'm not trying to give you too much to think about, but I want you to think about each of these things because they all do need some focus to pull this off. What other things would you think could be social proof? Well, on your website, if you have social sharing buttons, that's helpful because if they do hire you for an event and they send their attendees to your website, you could have 100 people visit your website over the week or 1,000. If they can't share who you are or your last tweet or whatever, it's going to be harder for them to be your ambassadors and get the word out for you. So is there a way that you have I guess what I'm trying to say is a piece of shareable information online that shows that you're funny and then also shows that you're an expert in your unfair advantage? And a great writing exercise, if you don't have something like that, is to go ahead and write 3 or 4 jokes that put your expertise in the setup, and you being the comedian is going to be the punchline and the social proof that you're funny and you're expert on this. So, and I've just kind of thought about this recently, but if I'm trying to get gigs where I talk about communication, I should preface one of my bits with, I did an event or I'm doing an event next week where I'm speaking to a group about communication. And they said their biggest problem is people talk, but nobody listens. Well, that reminds me of my own marriage. Boom, 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 do a joke about communicating. But you've let the entire audience know that, hey, I'm a comedian, but I'm also a speaker on communicating. I'm communicating. And if you say communicating like that, they probably don't believe you. I'm a speaker on communication. So there's ways to kind of like plant seeds in the audience's head. 300 people in the audience won't all be event planners, but probably 1 or 2 plan an event at some point. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, I didn't know they did that. Even though we assume that they could figure that out, they're not thinking about it if they're just watching a comedy show. So, and if you've got that joke and you've got a video clip of that joke, that's the one you want to have on your website that everybody sees, because all of a sudden it's reinforcing both things at the same time. Does that make sense? Okay, and then proof could also be recommendations, references, video testimonials of people speaking about you after your event. All those things come into play. Then let's go up to the top. The top right is the positioning statement. Oh, sorry. Back down to the bottom left for a second. Maybe right now you don't have any of the things we talked about that show that you're an expert. You can borrow somebody else's expertise until you get it together. And what I mean by that is you could post a blog and state in that blog that I'm Rhonda Correa. I speak at women's events. I saw this quote the other day from this speaker or this celebrity or this whoever, and it really spoke to me. You give the quote, you make sure the person gets the credit for the quote, and then you interpret the quote the way you would as if you were speaking to that group in front of you. So the statement could be something like Abraham Lincoln's, whatever you are, be a good one. And so you're giving credit to Abraham Lincoln. You're associating yourself with somebody smart, so that's one little step towards gaining credibility. But what does that mean in today's world? What are we trying to be? We're trying to prove to, whatever it might be. We're trying to prove to people who are on social media that we're somebody that we're not. What would Abraham Lincoln say today with that same quote? How would he rephrase that to address the way we are online? But it's just interpreting somebody else's message. And when you link back to their website or link back to their blog, that also builds credibility in Google for your website, that your website's just not promoting you, but it's promoting the concepts that you talk about. And so when people search those topics, Google moves you up because you're not afraid to send people elsewhere or reference other websites and other people with that knowledge. So you're kind of sharing your social traffic with that other site, if that makes any sense. And then you do want to write at least a few posts, some blogs on your website that reinforce the smart part, the non-comedy part. Not that comedy's not smart, but the smart part of your unfair advantage. All right, so let's roll up to the top right of the document now. And this, we've kind of touched on it at various points doing the Club 52 Hangouts, but I thought it'd be good to have all this in one place. It's your positioning statement, or if you have somebody that's trying to book you for events, it's something they can use, almost like a little mini script of how they can convey what you do to people who've never heard about you before. And so there's some blanks to fill in. If this was an email that you were just sending out cold to somebody, but you might have a mutual friend or a common connection, it's simply, hello, blank. We share and explain to them how you got their email address. A mutual friend, we share a similar interest, a similar goal. We share a love of comedy. We share a need for learning how to communicate, whatever that might be. My specialty is, and then you use an action word that helps a demographic achieve a specific result. So it could be, my specialty is teaching groups how to listen, or teaching. So we can put the demographic in front of the action word if you need to, or right next to it. So anyway, a specialty is teaching CEOs and decision makers how to listen better so they can get more productivity out of their employees. My show is called Listen Up, Laugh It Up. And the focus of the show is using my humorous skills to highlight listening inadequacies or communication breakdowns or whatever you're trying to pitch for that specific speech. And groups such as blank, 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 past clients have this to say about the show. So you're not just saying, I'm great at doing this. Bob said he came in and he changed the way our company culture works. Or Rhonda came in and she really helped us take off the mask and be who we are and discuss, our problems or whatever it might be. And then if they've read that far, you simply have a call to action, a CTA, which we've probably talked about before on here, but when would be a good time for me to connect with you to discuss how I can help your group achieve similar results while also having a lot of fun in the process? So you're kind of giving them the reason in the front part. Who am I? This is my unfair advantage. The program is called this, and it's designed to use humor to highlight the specific need that person has. Other groups like this have this to say about the show. When can we talk about this? And then you can always offer them at the end a link that they should click. And I would just give them one. You might have more in your signature, where they can see your Facebook profile or LinkedIn, but I would give them one call to action. You can find out more information about what I can offer you at, and send them to a specific page on the website, a specific video on your YouTube channel, or a specific landing page, which is just a page on your website that only has one option for them to complete. It could be to really, those are the three I would just, because those are the three that speak the loudest. Because if they go to your website, they'll see the rest of your abilities and your skills. If they go to YouTube channel, they'll see you speaking, which is what you're trying to get hired to do. So that's probably the most important thing. And a landing page will have all those things listed, but also some social proof and more recommendations and maybe video testimonials on top of that. So you can tweak that a little bit, but I wanted to get some structure if you didn't have a way of telling people what you do. And this is also, it could be considered an elevator speech. You hear that term a lot. If you have 30 seconds to tell somebody what you do. And I would just get comfortable telling people this. I would practice it in the car. I'd say it out loud. I would take out words that don't sound right when you say them, but look right when you type them, so that when you do say it, you're not stumbling over some word that you type but you never really say. You get comfortable with that, so when you bump into somebody, like John mentioned earlier, those monks that practice these moves, it's like automatic. What do you do for a living? Oh, man. Well, my name is this. Go right into it. So, and the more you have that, then it's just, when you have it down, somebody can repeat it to others a lot easier. And it wouldn't hurt for your business card or some easy piece of information that you could physically hand somebody to have that information on it as well. All right, and so that makes sense, right? Everybody's got the position statement And again, you could write a different one of these for every different unfair advantage you have, or every specific program that you have. If you have 5 programs, you'd have 5 slightly different versions of this. Not to give you too much to do, but I don't want you to have a blanket one that's so general. People are like, oh, you speak to people. Great. And other people say he's good at speaking to people. The middle section on the right-hand side is the value add. So this I like because you're almost telling people, and it's not a cocky thing, it's just a confidence thing, that, hey, whether you hire me or not, I'm going to give you a piece of information that's helpful. So you're almost saying, I'm not desperate for your work. I'm confident and competent that I can do it. But if for some reason you don't want to go with me just because my personality, or you need a man or a female for this event or whatever, here's some other information that can help you achieve your goal. And this, I find this piece of information, people resonate with this. It's unexpected that you would even consider pointing somebody towards another speaker or another resource when all they're expecting you to do is close the sale. But what you're doing here is you're closing the sale with a value that they didn't even anticipate. So it could be something like, whether you hire me or not, here's some information I'd like to share with you. A link to an article that you wrote, which is great. It could be a link to a video that you created where you quote other articles if you haven't written your own articles yet. It could be a link to an article you found in their industry publications. So if they're in human resources, you can research human resources on Google. You'll see different free online magazines that they put out. You can read a few articles, find one that's very helpful, link to that. And here's what I really like is a checklist. This is kind of what we're doing today. I'm giving you guys a checklist that you can go back, and almost everybody, whether they follow through on the checklist or not, it's a different thing. But having one is, you're not just telling them, go do this. You're saying, here's exactly how you can do it. And so you can look at this sheet when you've completed the process and go, okay, did I do everything? Did I take all the right steps? I'm in the right ballpark now. But if you just tell somebody, you should go out and be great today. Tell me next month how you were great. I mean, they're not going to do anything. That's just too broad. So whatever event I've got a video. I'll send you a link to it sometime the next week or so. Got a few finishing touches to put on it, but it's strictly 10 tips you can follow through on to make your event a great success. And it's simply the things that we all try to get across to clients, but they always fall short on: having the stage and the audience close together, proper lighting, starting on time, don't start during the meal, all those things. But it's like a 3-minute video, and it's got actual pictures of me at events where the stage was so big they had a marching band on it between me and the audience, and some video clips of you seeing audiences laugh and audience confused because they can't hear you. But it's a valuable resource if they've never planned an event before. But it's also a way for them to see me be funny before the event. And they also see me being helpful before the event. So even if they don't hire me this time, that might be a video they save and they share even, or show somebody else and go, look at this. This is exactly what we needed to know. So what resource could you give them that's either like a checklist or a walkthrough that would help you in case you did get hired? All of a sudden they know these 10 things. You don't have to go through it with them again. But if they go with somebody else, that person will have a more successful event, which means the person that hired them and could hire you most likely will have an event next year. So if you don't give them those tips, they fail. Nobody shows up. They're not going to have a comedian next year. Why not try to make this year work for them so you can be there next year? And a checklist is probably the easiest, a PDF. But if you want to do a video like I'm working on, I think because they can see you and hear you and see your personality, I think it's pretty helpful. And then the last thing, bottom right, is my least favorite question in comedy. Second least favorite. I guess my least favorite is tell me a joke. And if you want to flip this page over and write one out that you tell every time, that might not be a bad idea. But my style of comedy is. So they might be looking at 4 or 5 different comedians, and you all have a subset of teaching about communication or whatever, but they're just trying to figure out, well, I don't know if you're a good fit for our group. What style of comedy do you have? Or what is your style of comedy? And so until I kind of put this together, the answer was always different. The answer was always I would look at the person and try to figure out what kind of comedian they liked and say, I'm kind of like that. You like Jim Gaffigan? Oh, I'm kind of like Jim Gaffigan. You like Jerry Seinfeld? I'm kind of like Jerry Seinfeld. You like Chris Rock? I'm kind of. No, it's just, what is your style of comedy? And that's something that even we could help each other on, or you could ask other comics about if you're not exactly sure how you would describe your show. But if you don't have an answer, again, it makes you look like they don't even really do comedy, do they? Or they think they do comedy, but they're not really comedians. They can't even tell us what style their comedy is. So think about that as well. Because if you get this far in the conversation and they want to hire you, and that's the last question they ask, and you can't articulate it, all that work before might just fall short. So, of course, there's many more things we can look at when it comes to getting hired. But I think hopefully, and I'll just go around and ask, hopefully this is giving you a few things to think about where you can dial stuff in. And even when I put this together, I'm like, oh, I'm a little bit short on a couple of these things. I need to go work on that this week. I'll start with Rhonda. Anything in that sheet that jumped out at you that you need to work on or hadn't thought of before, or anything that was similar that I missed that I could put in there to make it better or make more sense?
I love the unfair advantage because that's something I never really thought about, what skills I've had before that can translate, and just, I've checked out my competition, but never to that. I don't know if I've really checked it out to that extent to really key in on, to laser focus on what are they really doing or what are they really saying, or so I like that. And as far as style of comedy, are there questions that you could ask to kind of give you a better idea of what style your comedy is?
Yeah, so that's a great point. I would ask comedians and non-comedians to describe you. So somebody that's seen your show, and really your best audience is the people that just walked out after seeing you. And you could even have, if this feels awkward, to like be at your merch table or by the exit and go, hey, I'm doing a little research. Could you just tell me what style of comedy do you think I had up there? You could have a friend do that, and they could be polling people and they're not even knowing it. Like, hey, man, this is the first time seeing Rhonda? Oh, yeah. Man, I've been trying to tell my friends what style of comedy she has. How would you describe it? And this could just be your friend, it could be your husband over in the corner talking to people. They don't even know he's your husband, but he's doing the research for you. And you might find some things, words that are keywords that you could use to promote what you do and describe what you do that you wouldn't think of, because we're comedians. We're only thinking of comedian terms, like for example, 2 CDs ago, I had a music CD, 15 songs, and I sent it to some of my musical comedian favorites: Tim Cavanaugh, Haywood Banks, Todd Yon, some of these guys that I watched when I was in the clubs, and they just crushed it. And I said, I'm just going to, because you inspired me to do music and comedy, I want to send my CD to you, and just let me know when it arrived and that you got it. And they each replied back with not only thanks for the CD, and they were nice and said they enjoyed it. Whether they did or not, who knows, because we're dead to comedy in a lot of ways. But they each would say things like, so Tim Cavanaugh said, what I like about your songs, which is really what he likes about my comedy, is that we know everything about you, because your first song was There's a Baby in the House. And then you talked about the married life. And so we know that you're a family guy, that you love your kids, that you got a wife, and you guys communicate in a fun way to each other. And he's like, I just feel like I know you. Even if I haven't seen you in 10 years, you just caught me up on your whole life. So I'm like, oh, that's very useful, And then Haywood Banks replied back. He goes, hey, man, I listened to your CD. You are the king of the worst case scenario. And I've never even thought about that before. But comedy songs and comedy in a lot of ways is just like, look at this horrible situation. Who's this dumb, or why are we this stupid? Or in all my songs, because I don't go dirty, up the level of risk, why this is an important thing for me to sing about, is that there's some horrible consequence of things not going right. So those 2 pieces of information I would have never thought of on my own. And it was 2 seasoned comedians that gave me that. But even maybe a person who doesn't do comedy could articulate those same things back to me. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So in my positioning statements, or my style of comedy is, I could use both of those things and say, I'm just a very transparent family guy on stage who fears the worst case scenario. And boy, when I said that, I'm like, oh, you know what? That's kind of one of my filters or my point of view. Is like, I love my family, but I worry about the worst case scenario in different situations. So I'm kind of a protective person. So when I view a potential idea for comedy, I can walk it through that filter or that lens a little bit and go, how would the guy who expects the worst to happen articulate this joke? And it'll give you a couple extra lines. And I haven't got to see either of you in a long setting to where I could sit there and know, I know who you are as people a little bit, but I would ask some people I've seen you do multiple shows, or even better, somebody saw you 2 years ago and just saw you again recently, and maybe even ask them, what do you think the big difference is between 2 years ago and today? And maybe that'll tip off something, because 2 years ago you might have just been somebody standing on the stage telling jokes, but now you've got a little something extra that they pick up on. John, anything jump out at you in the sheet?
Well, this has been immensely helpful. Two things. I did a gig under a big top tent a couple of summers ago, and the comment was made, you do comedy and so much more. So I took that as one of those statements, that describes what I do. But I've been in medicine my whole adult life, and I have a handicapped wife, so I have buku experience in being a care provider. So I'm thinking if I could do a keynote about encouraging care providers and put comedy and humor into it, and put the cartooning, which by the way, Rhonda was very inspirational, getting me going there.
Good.
Put the cartooning into the PowerPoints. I think that's the unfair advantage that I have, and it's what I know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I'm not stretching. It's what I know, and I think I could put something inspirational that would help care providers.
I think 100%.
Yeah, that would give me a market with MS Society, the Cancer Society, with local hospitals. That potentially is a fantastic idea.
Yeah, and comedy and care, those, and cartooning, those are all three alliterated C's that
There you go. Yeah, I'll write that down.
communicate, improving care through comedy and cartooning, or you can work around with that and find some ideas of how it works. But by far, your drawing skill is off the charts, and knowing now that you have this medical background, that's a huge unfair advantage. And I also know that the medical field has so many meetings where they need speakers, and they have very serious technical, here's what you do in case of this, and to offset every 5 of those, they have something a little bit lighter where they still learn something, but they laugh a little bit.
Right.
And the other great thing, John, is the 2 groups that I perform in front of that laugh the hardest are caregivers and teachers. And so when you get video of you speaking to caregivers, those laughs are going to be bigger than if you're speaking to a group of male accountants or engineers, or, you know what I mean? Anybody that works in a high stress environment, they laugh harder because they know the value of letting that steam.
Right. That's very true.
It's an incredible group to get in front of. And you might find pretty quickly that there's not as much competition in that space, especially when you narrow down all the possible contenders from having comedy, cartooning, and the actual job background, and you're a spouse of somebody who you give care to as well. That's just like, you're the guy. So now it's just crafting a program, and you have so much natural knowledge that I would even say focus on the less serious stuff as much or more as the comedy aspect of it, so that they see the true value and the takeaways, and then the comedy is just icing on the cake.
All right. I didn't understand that statement. Say that again.
So when you put your program together for these groups, I would focus first on putting together the non-funny aspect of it, and I would never give them more than 3 things that they should try to do.
Right.
So I would build those out with specific knowledge and stories of real things that happened, some statistical backup on, you just can't say that a bunch of people suffer from this. Let's find out exactly in America, 1.3 million suffer with this. So how do we help those 1.3 million people, whatever it might be?
Right.
and use that as your framework. And then every statement you have in your framework of your topics, make sure you have a funny anecdote or a cartoon. And these could be cartoons you draw ahead of time. You might save one blank cartoon where it's mostly filled out, but you fill in the actual thought bubble at the end, or the 3 takeaways. You go to the big pad on the wall or whatever, where you've got the pre-drawn person. It could be the nurse, it could be a caregiver, it could be an in-home caregiver, whatever the part of the speech is. And you fill in the takeaway in that, so they see you write it, they write it, and they know every time you go to that board, that's a key thing they need to remember.
Okay. All right. That's good. Wow.
But that's a great, I mean, not only is it an extremely important unfair advantage, but you've got so much depth in it that it should kind of, I wouldn't say write itself because it's going to take some work, but you shouldn't be at a loss of the important non-funny stuff. And then you write it, and you're great at writing those 3-4 panel cartoons too. So every takeaway point, all 3 of those should probably have a funny cartoon to go with it, so that, man, I didn't even think about this, John, but all the medical journals and magazines out there that could use cartoons drawn specifically for the topic that they're addressing in their main stories for each issue.
That's cool.
But yeah, those cartoons, man, that's super good, and you're so good at it. So if you don't share that gift, that's an issue, buddy.
Very helpful, Rick. Thank you. Well, a good hour, a lot of information.
Good deal.
Yeah, really good.